The town of Cinder Creek lay under a veil of dust and rumor. Sunlight never seemed to linger there long. It came and went like a skittish horse. But if there was one name that could still make the saloon go quiet, it was Evelyn Shaw, the woman the townsfolk called the Black Widow of the West. She'd come to Cinder Creek as a bride once, years ago, when her laugh was still soft, and her hands were not yet calloused from ranch work. Her first husband, Thomas Shaw, had been a gambler with more charm than good sense. One night, a drunken card game at the Silver Star Saloon turned deadly. By dawn, Thomas was gone, stabbed in the ribs over a hand of kings and fools. Evelyn buried him on the ridge behind the ranch, her veil fluttering black in the wind. People whispered that she didn't shed a single tear. A year later, she married. Again, James Dalton, a man with strong shoulders and a temper to match. He brought her more bruises than comfort. When the barn burned one winter night, the flames were so fierce they turned the snow to steam. Evelyn was found standing in the field, her face lit orange by the fire, her eyes hollow and still. James's body was never recovered. By sunrise, the town had already decided she'd cursed her husbands, or worse. Now 5 years had passed, and Evelyn lived alone on Shaw Ranch, the land her first husband had left behind, and her second had nearly ruined. She worked it herself, with the help of an aging hand and a few loyal horses. The fences were mended, the roof patched, the cattle fed. She spoke little, smiled less. Her black dresses were not a sign of mourning anymore. They were a warning. No man dared to call on her, though some tried in secret. They'd ride up her, long lonely road, and come back pale-faced, muttering that the place felt haunted. The truth was simpler. Evelyn Shaw wasn't a ghost. She was flesh and willpower, too proud to ask for kindness and too hurt to offer it. Every Sunday she rode into town for supplies. The general store would go quiet when her boots crossed the threshold. Mothers tugged their children close, men tipped their hats out of habit, and the clerk always gave her change with trembling fingers. She never spoke more than she had to. Sugar, flour, rope. Her voice was low and steady, like the sound of a gun being cocked. Rumors followed her like shadows. Some said she'd poisoned her second husband. Others swore she'd made a deal with the devil himself to keep her land. A few of the older ranchers claimed they'd seen her at midnight, walking the fields with a lantern, whispering to the wind as if she were talking to someone unseen. In truth, she was. She talked to her guilt, her ghosts, and the God she wasn't sure would ever forgive her. That spring, the railroad company sent letters to landowners all across the valley. They wanted to buy the Shaw property, rich grazing land, good for track laying. Most folks sold quick. The money was too tempting. But when the letter reached Evelyn's hands, she tore it in half without a word and fed it to the fire. The land was all she had left of the men who'd taken everything from her. She wouldn't let strangers take that too. From her porch, she watched the horizon darken with thunderclouds. In the distance, a lone rider was crossing the plain, a tall figure on a black horse, coming straight toward her. She didn't know it yet, but that rider would change everything. He was the storm and the calm after it. And for the first time in years, Cinder Creek would whisper her name, not with fear, but with wonder. The morning the giant rode into Cinder Creek, the sky was washed in silver and dust. The town was half asleep, the saloon doors creaking in the wind, and the blacksmith's hammer the only steady sound. Then a shadow fell across the main street, a man so tall he seemed to carry the horizon with him. His name was Cole Maddox, though most who'd heard of him called him the Giant of Montana. He was a man who didn't need words to make himself known. Broad-shouldered, his coat worn thin from years of travel, he had the look of someone who'd seen too much and spoken too little. He rode a coal-colored horse named Titan, a beast nearly as big as he was. When he dismounted in front of the general store, the ground itself seemed to notice. Cole wasn't a man of town ways. He came from the open country, mines, ranches, logging camps, the raw edge of civilization. The railroad company had sent for him, offering good pay to oversee track construction through the valley. He'd come to sign papers, take orders, and move on. But fate had a way of twisting plans, and it began the moment he saw Evelyn Shaw. She was at the auction yard, standing apart from the others, her black dress cutting a sharp line against the dust. Her hat brim shadowed her face, but the tilt of her chin spoke volumes: defiance, control, pride. The men around her avoided her eyes. Cole didn't. Something in her stillness called to him, the way a storm calls to lightning. He watched as she bid on a wagon wheel and a bundle of fence posts. Practical, no-nonsense purchases. Every motion was measured, efficient, untouched by vanity. A ranch hand nearby muttered, "That's her, the Black Widow. Best steer clear." Cole turned slightly, his gaze still on Evelyn. "Black Widow?" he asked. The man snorted. "2 husbands buried. Bad luck follows her like dust." Cole's brow furrowed. "Or maybe it's just dust that follows her because she works." That answer earned him a strange look, but Cole didn't care. Something about the woman intrigued him. There was steel in her posture, but sorrow in her eyes that didn't match the cruel stories whispered around her name. When the auction ended, Evelyn lifted her parcels alone, ignoring the gawking crowd. Cole stepped forward, silent but certain, and took one bundle from her hands. "I didn't ask for help," she said, her tone clipped and cold. "I know," he replied, voice deep as thunder. "But sometimes, help ain't about asking." She studied him, this mountain of a man with calm eyes and rough hands. "Who are you?" "Cole Maddox," he said simply. "Looking for work." "Try the railroad," she said flatly. "They're always hiring men with strong backs." He nodded. "They already did, but I quit." She frowned. "You just arrived." He gave a small smile. "Changed my mind when I saw who they were pushing off their land." Evelyn went still. "You don't know me." "No, ma'am," he said softly. "But I know injustice when I see it." For a long moment, silence stretched between them. The wind lifted her veil, brushing her cheek, and Cole thought she looked less like a widow and more like a woman standing guard over her own soul. Later that evening, he rode up the long, rutted road to Shaw Ranch. The gates sagged, the fences leaned, and yet the land held a strange dignity, like its owner. Evelyn met him on the porch, arms crossed. "I told you I don't hire strangers." "Then I'll work as a guest," he said. "A week. If I'm no good, I'll ride on." She hesitated. In his eyes, she saw no pity, no judgment, only quiet strength. Against her better sense, she nodded once. "A week," she said. As the sun set, painting the plains in gold and red, Cole unpacked his saddlebag and went to work before she could change her mind. He didn't know it yet, but this wasn't the job he'd found. It was the home he'd been running from all his life. The next morning broke quiet and pale, the sky soft as a bruise. A thin fog hung over Shaw Ranch, coiling through the fences and the fields. From the porch, Evelyn Shaw stood with her coffee mug in hand, watching the giant she had reluctantly allowed to stay. Cole Maddox was already at work. He moved through the yard with a kind of calm power, his long stride steady, his hands sure. He didn't wait for instructions. He found the broken gate, the half-toppled fence, the loose boards in the stable wall, and fixed them, one by one, as if he'd lived there his whole life. The rhythm of his hammer and the creak of old wood filled the silence that had long haunted the ranch. Evelyn didn't know whether to be irritated or impressed. She wasn't used to anyone taking charge without her say-so. The ranch had been her fortress since James's death, a place where her rules were the only ones that mattered. But Cole worked like he belonged there, as though he'd made peace with the land before even meeting its owner. By noon, she'd made up her mind to test him. "Mr. Maddox," she called from the porch, "you seem to have plenty of opinions on how things should be done." He straightened, sweat glistening on his neck. "Just fixing what's broken, ma'am." "And what if I like it broken?" she shot back. Cole looked up at her then, and though his face was calm, his eyes carried something firm, unbending. Then, ma'am, he said slowly, you're working against yourself. A ranch like this don't stay alive if it's kept wounded. The words stung more than she wanted to admit. Still, she crossed her arms and met his gaze evenly. You've been here less than a day and you think you know this land? You think you know me? No, he said simply. But I know pain when I see it. Evelyn froze. For a long second, neither spoke. The breeze tugged at her skirts, carrying the smell of earth and cedar. Then she turned away, her voice sharp. Fix the east fence if you must. Then be gone by sundown, but Cole didn't leave. He worked through the afternoon and into the twilight, patching the fence, feeding the horses, even cleaning the troughs. When she went out to check, she found the animals calm for the first time in months. Her heart ached at the sight because she realized she hadn't heard laughter, human or otherwise, on that land in years. At supper, she placed a single plate on the table. He came in, ducking under the doorway, washing his hands without a word. She ate in silence, but he spoke softly, asking about the ranch, about how long she'd been alone. She offered short answers, measured, guarded. You don't talk much, he said at last, half smiling. I talk enough, she replied. He nodded. Guess that's fair. Some things ain't meant for talking anyway. They're meant for fixing. That line lingered long after they finished eating. Evelyn found herself watching him from the doorway as he stepped outside, sitting on the porch steps, looking up at the stars. There was a gentleness to him that unsettled her, a steadiness she'd forgotten could exist in a man. That night, she dreamed of fire again, the barn, the screams, the smoke. But this time, when she woke, her heart wasn't pounding as hard. From outside came the low hum of a man's voice. Cole, softly singing an old trail song as he bedded down near the stables. Something in the melody reached the quiet places of her soul. She sat up listening, and for the first time in years, the ranch didn't feel like a tomb. Evelyn lay back down and whispered to the darkness, just 1 week. But even she could feel the lie in her own words. The night wind carried the smell of rain and memory. The hills around Shaw Ranch were dark silhouettes, and the only light came from the soft glow of a lantern hanging by the stable door. Inside the big house, Evelyn Shaw sat by her kitchen window, staring at the flame flickering in her lamp. Every night it burned until dawn, just as it had the night her barn caught fire. She told herself she kept it lit for safety, to watch over the ranch. But deep down she knew it was guilt's torch. It reminded her that the past couldn't be buried, no matter how much land she owned or how many fences she built. Outside, Cole Maddox moved like a quiet shadow, checking the livestock before turning in. It had been 5 days since he arrived, and he hadn't once asked about her husband's or the town's gossip. He didn't pry. He just worked, and somehow his silence said more than any man's words ever had. Evelyn should have been grateful for that, but it unsettled her. A man who didn't fear her, who didn't pity her, who just saw her, that was dangerous. When thunder cracked across the plains, she flinched. The sound rolled through her chest like a memory of fire and screams. The wind howled against the shutters, and for an instant she smelled smoke. Not real smoke, but the ghost of it, thick and choking in her throat. She stood abruptly, knocking over her chair, and stumbled out onto the porch. The night was heavy with clouds. Her breath came fast, uneven. The storm wasn't the danger. It was the memories clawing at her mind. Her second husband, James Dalton, yelling, the bottle breaking, the shove, the lantern falling. She remembered the fire blooming across the hay, the heat licking her face as she ran. She remembered the silence after his scream stopped. Mrs. Shaw? Cole's voice came from the darkness, low and steady. She turned sharply, her pulse hammering. He stood a few feet away, hat in hand, rain beading on his shoulders. You all right? He asked. I'm fine, she lied. Go back inside. But he didn't move. He studied her, his gaze patient but unwavering. You're shaking. I said I'm fine. Her voice broke on the word. She looked away, gripping the porch rail until her knuckles whitened. Cole stepped closer, slow as if approaching a frightened animal. You don't have to pretend, he said gently. You ain't the only one who's been through hell. Something in his tone, quiet, almost tender, made her chest tighten. "You know nothing about me," she whispered. "No," he said, "but I know pain when I see it. I've seen it in the mirror more times than I care to count." Evelyn's eyes glistened in the dim lantern light. She wanted to tell him to leave, to mind his own business, but the words wouldn't come. For years, she'd held herself together with iron will and silence. Yet standing before this stranger, this giant with the gentlest eyes she'd ever seen, she felt something in her finally give. She sank down onto the porch step, the rain pattering around them. Her voice came out as a whisper. "He wasn't a good man, Cole, my second husband. He was cruel. And that night, I left the lantern burning. I thought he'd follow me out, but he didn't. The fire took him. The confession hung in the air between them. Cole didn't speak for a long time. Then he crouched beside her, his voice rough but kind. You did what you had to do to survive." Tears she hadn't shed in years slipped down her cheeks. "The town thinks I'm cursed. Then let 'em," he said simply. "Curses only stick if you believe in them." She gave a soft, broken laugh. "You don't scare easy, do you, Mr. Maddox?" He smiled faintly. "Not of you, ma'am. Not anymore." When he finally stood, she looked up at him through the rain. The lantern light flickered between them, soft and golden, like forgiveness. For the first time in years, Evelyn didn't feel haunted, just human. Spring in Cinder Creek should have been kind that year. The snow melted into clear streams, the meadows greened, and the herds grew strong again. But peace never lasted long on Shaw Ranch, especially not for Evelyn Shaw. The men from the railroad company came back. They'd been prowling the valley for months, buying up land cheap, laying track across the open country. Most ranchers had sold, some for greed, some for fear. Evelyn had refused every offer, tearing up their letters, sending their messengers off her porch. She thought her defiance had silenced them. She was wrong. Cole saw the riders first. 3 men in fine coats, city hats, and polished boots, outsiders. They came at a lazy pace, but their confidence was the kind that stank of power. Evelyn stood on the porch as they approached, arms crossed, her black skirts whispering in the wind. "Mrs. Shaw," the one in front called out, smiling like a salesman. "Always a pleasure. I trust you've reconsidered our offer?" She didn't blink. "The answer's the same as last time." He dismounted, brushing dust from his sleeves. "The railroad's coming through this valley whether you like it or not. You can sell now and walk away with profit, or we can condemn the land for industrial use. Either way, we'll have it." Her eyes narrowed. "Over my dead body." "That can be arranged," one of the others muttered. Before Evelyn could speak, a deep voice came from behind her. "You boys might want to watch your words." Cole stepped out of the barn, towering in his work shirt, sleeves rolled, hands rough and steady. He didn't have a gun, but he didn't need one. The 3 men stiffened. The one in charge tried to laugh it off. "And who might you be?" "Just the man who works here," Cole said. "And the man who'll make sure no harm comes to this place, or the lady who owns it." The leader's smile vanished. "This is none of your concern, mister." Cole's gaze was cold steel. "You made it my concern when you rode in here talking about graves." A long silence stretched between them. The railroad men exchanged glances, then mounted their horses again. "You've made a mistake, Mrs. Shaw," the leader said. "A big one." When they rode off, Evelyn let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "They'll be back," she murmured. "I know," Cole replied. "But so will I." In the days that followed, tension settled over the ranch like storm clouds. Cole repaired the fences, strengthened the gates, and made sure the wells were clean and guarded. He knew the kind of men the railroad hired, men who'd sabotage, threaten, even kill for profit. Evelyn didn't ask questions, but she could feel the unspoken promise in his quiet presence. He would not let harm touch her again. But the attacks started small. One morning, the cattle wouldn't drink. The water was sour, poisoned with oil. Another night, the chicken coop was set aflame, a warning scrawled on the barn door, "Sell or suffer." Evelyn stood before the smoldering ruin, fury and fear twisting in her chest. They won't stop, she said softly. Cole was beside her, jaw clenched. Then neither will we. The next day, he rode into town, straight to the sheriff's office. But the lawman just leaned back in his chair, pretending indifference. Best not stir trouble, Maddox. The railroad's got money, lawyers, and friends in high places. So that's it, Cole said, voice low. You're bought. The sheriff's silence was answer enough. That evening, Cole returned to the ranch, his expression unreadable. Evelyn was waiting by the fence, her hair loose from the wind. They own the town, he said quietly. Then we stand alone, she replied. Cole looked at her, the setting sun turning her face to firelight. Not alone, ma'am. Not while I'm breathing. For the first time, she didn't argue. She met his gaze, steady and certain, and something passed between them, something wordless but powerful. The woman everyone called the Black Widow, and the man who refused to fear her had found common cause, and the men who thought they could break her ranch were about to learn the hardest truth of the West. You can't burn what's already been through the fire. The storm rolled in at dusk, black clouds crawling over the plains like a living thing. The air was thick with electricity, the smell of rain and danger. Evelyn Shaw stood at the window, watching the first flash of lightning split the sky above the distant ridge. She could feel it in her bones. Something was coming. For days, she and Cole Maddox had prepared for the worst. After the railroad's threats and the sheriff's silence, they'd repaired every fence, secured every gate, and stocked the barn with water and grain. But Evelyn knew greed didn't stop with words. Men like those from the railroad didn't give up. They took. Cole came in from the fields, dripping with sweat and rain, the brim of his hat heavy with water. Storm's moving fast, he said. We'll need to bring the horses in now. I already did, she replied, tying her shawl tighter. But I don't trust the lower stable. It leaks near the back. Cole nodded, grabbing his lantern. Then we'll move them to the upper barn. Come on! Together they stepped into the wind. Rain slashed sideways, stinging their faces. Thunder growled above them, shaking the ground. Evelyn's skirts whipped around her legs as she fought through the mud, Cole's broad shadow just ahead. The horses neighed nervously, sensing the storm's fury. They worked quickly, moving the animals one by one. Evelyn soothed each mare with a touch to the nose, her voice calm despite her racing heart. Cole lifted hay bales like they were nothing, spreading dry bedding and sealing the barn doors tight. Then, through the roar of the storm, Evelyn smelled something that froze her blood. Smoke. Cole, she breathed, spinning toward the window slit. Do you smell that? He lifted his head, nostrils flaring. Stay here. But she was already moving, lantern in hand, racing into the rain. The wind fought her every step. But she saw it. The faint orange glow flickering on the far edge of the property. The lower barn. The one the railroad men had marked. God help us, she whispered. Cole caught up to her in 3 long strides. They've said it again, he said grimly. Get back to the house. No, my tack's still in there, and feed for half the herd. Evelyn, she didn't listen. She tore away from him and ran into the storm. Her boots sank in the mud, her dress soaked and heavy, but she didn't stop until she reached the barn. Flames licked through the cracks, hungry and bright. The sight brought her to her knees. It was happening again. The fire, the screaming wind, the helplessness. She could almost hear James Dalton's voice shouting her name, the heat on her face, the smoke clawing at her lungs. Then Cole's hand was on her shoulder, pulling her up. Evelyn, look at me. She did. His face, streaked with rain and ash, was the only thing real in the chaos. This ain't then, he said firmly. This is now. You're not alone anymore. Something in his tone broke the trance. Evelyn blinked hard, breath ragged, and nodded. Together they kicked the doors open. Cole charged inside, hauling out sacks of feed, while she led the frightened horses away from the blaze. The heat seared their skin. The smoke made her eyes stream. At one point, a burning beam cracked and fell. Cole threw his shoulder against it, pushing it aside with sheer strength. By the time the rain finally smothered the fire, the barn was half gone. But the animals were safe. Evelyn stood in the mud, hair plastered to her cheeks, watching the smoke curl upward like ghosts leaving the earth. Cole walked up beside her, panting. "You did good, ma'am." She turned to him, her voice trembling. "No, we did." For a long moment, they just stood there, two silhouettes against the storm's dying light. Then she whispered, "You should have left when you had the chance." He looked at her softly, rain dripping from his chin. "And miss this fight? Not a chance." The thunder rolled one last time, distant now, and Evelyn felt something shift deep inside her, a fear untangling, a heart beginning to thaw. The storm passed, leaving the valley heavy with silence. The air smelled of wet ash and trampled earth, and the half-burned barn stood like a wounded sentinel against the dawn. Evelyn Shaw hadn't slept. She sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the sky bleed from gray to gold. Every muscle in her body ached, but her heart was louder than the thunder had been. Cole Maddox had worked through the night. Even after the rain stopped, he'd hauled debris, checked on the animals, and made sure the fire wouldn't start again. Now, as the first light touched the horizon, he walked up to the house, boots caked in mud, shirt torn at the shoulder. "You should rest," he said quietly. Evelyn didn't look at him. "I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see fire." He set down his tools, leaning against the post. "That's because you ain't done carrying it." Her gaze flicked toward him. "Carrying what?" "Guilt," he said. "You've been holding on to it like it's the only thing keeping you alive." Evelyn's throat tightened.
For years, she had heard whispers, accusations, judgment, but never understanding. Not once.
Now here was this man, this stranger, speaking truth as if he'd known her soul all along. "You think you understand me," she said, her voice brittle. "I don't," he admitted. "But I know what it's like to lose something you can't forgive yourself for." That silenced her. He sat down on the step beside her, the boards creaking under his weight. The quiet stretched between them until finally she broke it. "James." "My second husband," she began slowly. "He was a cruel man. The kind that smiled in public and broke things in private. When he drank, he'd take it out on me. On the horses, on anything that breathed." Cole listened without flinching. "The night he died," she continued, voice trembling, "I ran from him. He was drunk, shouting, waving a lantern. I told him I was leaving. He laughed. He said he'd burn the place down before he let me walk out." Her hands twisted in her lap. "I left the lantern burning. I thought he'd follow me. But he didn't," the words cracked. She pressed a fist against her mouth, eyes wet. "I heard him scream. I could have gone back, but I didn't. I froze. And when the barn went up, I let it." The confession tore out of her like a wound reopening. She had never spoken those words aloud, not to the sheriff, not to the priest, not to a single living soul. For a long moment, Cole said nothing. Then, softly, "He would have killed you, Evelyn." Her breath hitched. "You did what you had to," he said, voice low but firm. "You chose to live. That ain't sin, that's survival." She shook her head, tears sliding down her cheeks. "You don't understand. Every time I hear the word widow, I feel like they're saying murderer." Cole turned toward her then, his eyes steady. "You can't let them name you. Folks love stories that make them feel righteous. Let 'em talk. You survived hell and you're still standing. That's what matters." For the first time, she looked at him, really looked. His face was rough, weathered, and yet there was gentleness there that reached straight into her shattered places. "Why do you care?" she whispered. "You could have ridden away." "You should have," he gave a small, sad smile. "Because I know what it's like to lose someone and wish you'd done it different." His gaze drifted toward the horizon. "My wife, years ago, she died while I was away driving cattle. I thought I was earning us a future, but she got sick. By the time I came back, it was too late. I've been running ever since, trying to fix what can't be fixed." The porch went quiet again. Two broken souls, side by side, bound by the weight of what they couldn't undo. Finally, Evelyn whispered, You think there's still redemption for people like us? Cole reached over, covering her trembling hand with his. Redemption ain't earned, it's accepted. The first light of morning spilled across them, golden and soft. For the first time in years, Evelyn didn't feel like a ghost. She felt, barely, hesitantly alive. The days after the fire brought a tense calm, like the stillness before a gunfight. The smell of smoke lingered in the grass, and Evelyn Shaw could feel trouble riding closer with every sunrise. Cole Maddox had been right. The railroad men wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. By the end of the week, their threats became promises. Tracks had been laid as far as Miller's Pass, and Evelyn's ranch was the last piece of land standing in their way. The men from the company returned, this time not in polished boots, but on horseback, dust rising like a storm behind them. 10 of them, armed and confident. Evelyn saw them first from the ridge. She didn't run inside. She just straightened her shoulders and reached for her rifle. When Cole came up beside her, she didn't need to speak. One look between them said everything. "Guess this is it," he murmured. "It always was," she replied. They moved together with practiced calm, Evelyn loading rifles, Cole checking the doors, pouring water into the troughs for cover. The animals sensed it too, shifting restlessly in their pens. The wind carried the dry, metallic scent of coming violence. By the time the riders reached the yard, Cole stood in front of the porch, his frame casting a shadow across the steps. Evelyn stood behind him, rifle cradled but steady. The leader of the gang, a sharp-eyed man in a black coat, grinned. "Afternoon, Mrs. Shaw. Heard you were having trouble letting go of your land. We're here to help you reconsider." Evelyn's voice was calm, hard as iron. "You'll leave the same way you came, or not at all." Laughter rippled through the men, cruel and confident. But Cole didn't flinch. He stepped forward, his voice low and even. "You got one chance to ride out. After that, I stopped being polite." The leader spat into the dirt. "You think one man's gonna stop us?" Cole gave a slow nod. "One man's all it takes if he ain't afraid to stand." The silence after that stretched long and sharp. Then came the first gunshot. The sound shattered the air like thunder. Bullets hit the fence posts, splintering wood. Evelyn ducked behind the porch rail, returning fire with calm precision. Cole moved like a storm unleashed, firing, reloading, shielding her when the shots came close. It wasn't a long fight, but it was fierce. The railroad men hadn't expected resistance, least of all from a woman and a drifter. Cole's size made him an unmissable target, yet somehow every shot that came near him missed by inches. Evelyn's bullets, however, found their mark, cracking the air with the kind of justice she'd been denied for years. When the smoke cleared, the yard was littered with empty shells and wounded pride. The remaining men fled, dragging their injured leader behind them. Cole stood in the settling dust, chest heaving. He turned to find Evelyn still standing on the porch, rifle lowered, her hair loose and wild from the wind. Their eyes met, both exhausted, both alive. She stepped forward slowly. "You could have died today," he smiled faintly. "Would have been worth it." Evelyn's breath caught. "Why?" "Because dying's easy," he said. "But standing beside you? That's living." For a long moment neither spoke. The world around them was quiet again, the kind of quiet that only comes after the storm. Cole reached for her hand, rough fingers brushing her wrist. "It's over, Evelyn." "They won't be back." Her eyes searched his. "How can you be so sure?" "Because men like that only know how to take. And you showed them what happens when someone finally says no." She looked past him to the horizon, where the sun was breaking through the clouds. The light touched her face, softening it, turning her black dress to gold. "Then maybe," she said, voice trembling, "it's time I start living too." Cole smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." The wind stirred again, carrying the smell of rain and renewal. The fight was done, the land still theirs. But more than that, Evelyn's curse had broken, not by miracle, but by love, grit, and the will to stand unafraid. When the gunfire faded, the whole valley seemed to exhale. The Shaw Ranch, once a place of whispers and dread, now stood as a symbol of defiance. Word spread fast across Cedar Bluff. The Black Widow had stood her ground, and the men who came to take her land had ridden away beaten. for the first time in years. The townsfolk came to the ranch not with rumors but with open hands. The blacksmith brought iron hinges to mend the burned barn. The preacher's wife came with food and quilts. Even Sheriff Yates, who'd always avoided her gaze, rode out to say, "Ma'am, you done this town proud." Evelyn didn't know how to feel. For years, the same people had crossed the street to avoid her shadow. Now they treated her like a hero. She wanted to believe them, but she'd learned the hard way that folks changed their words faster than their hearts. Still, when she saw the children running in her yard and heard laughter where silence had reigned, something inside her began to soften. Cole Maddox stayed by her side through it all, helping repair the barn, guiding the neighbors who came to lend a hand. His presence was steady as the mountains, quiet but sure. He didn't speak much about what came next, but his every action spoke of belonging, hammering new beams, mending fences, and teaching the ranch hands the old ways of working cattle. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Evelyn stood on the porch watching him at the corral. He was showing the young stable boy how to gentle a skittish mare. Soft voice, slow movements, never force. It was strange, she thought, how a man so big could move with such gentleness. When he turned and caught her watching, she didn't look away. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the need to hide behind a cold stare. "You're healing the land," she said as he approached. He smiled. "No, ma'am." "You are." The words lingered in the air between them. He wasn't talking about fences or barns. He meant her. That night, they hosted the town's first barn dance in nearly a decade. The rebuilt barn glowed with lanterns, and the scent of fresh hay mixed with the sound of fiddle strings. Evelyn wore a blue dress instead of black. It wasn't new, but it hadn't seen daylight since her first husband's funeral. When she walked into the light, the room fell quiet for a heartbeat, and then one by one, people smiled. It felt strange, being seen without scorn. She half expected someone to whisper "widow" under their breath, but no one did. Not this time. When Cole came to her, hat in hand, he gave her a small bow. "May I?" She hesitated only a second before placing her hand in his. He led her to the floor, his palm warm and steady on her back. The fiddle struck up a tune, and they began to dance. At first, she was stiff, uncertain. But then she looked up into his eyes. Calm, clear, unguarded, and something inside her let go. They moved in rhythm, the world falling away around them. For once, she wasn't the Black Widow. She was just Evelyn, a woman laughing, living, and loved. The crowd clapped and stomped their boots, cheering when the song ended. Someone shouted, "About time, Miss Shaw," and the laughter that followed was warm, teasing, and kind. As the night wore on, Evelyn stepped outside for air. The sky was clear, the stars bright as scattered silver. Cole joined her, resting his arm against the porch post. "Funny," she said softly. "I spent years wishing the world would leave me alone. Now I'm grateful it didn't," Cole smiled. "You gave them something to believe in again. They thought this town was dying, but you proved it could still fight." She turned toward him. "And why did you stay, Cole?" "After everything?" He met her gaze, his expression gentle but firm. "Because the world's full of ghosts, Evelyn. But I reckon you're the first one who decided to come back to life." Her breath caught in her throat. For the first time, she didn't feel haunted by the past. She felt redeemed, and as the night wind brushed her face carrying the sound of music and laughter, Evelyn Shaw realized that she didn't just survive the West, she had reclaimed it. The summer stretched long and golden after the night of the barn dance. The land, once scarred and silent, bloomed again under the steady rhythm of work and laughter. Grass returned to the pastures, calves grew strong, and the air carried the scent of wild sage instead of smoke. For Evelyn Shaw, every sunrise felt like a small miracle. She'd wake to the soft creak of the porch boards, knowing Cole Maddox was already outside, tending to the herd, mending fences, whistling to the horses in that low, steady tone that somehow made everything right in the world. The townsfolk had stopped calling her the Black Widow. Now, they simply said Miss Shaw, or even Evelyn, their voices carrying respect instead of fear. The whispers were gone, replaced by nods and smiles when she rode into town. For the first time in her life, she felt she didn't have to defend her name. It spoke for itself. Yet, even peace brought uncertainty. One morning, Cole received a letter sealed in red wax. He read it in silence, his jaw tightening. When Evelyn asked, he only said, "Work up north." "Good pay." The words hit her harder than a bullet. She nodded, pretending it didn't matter. But that night she couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching the moonlight slide across the fields, remembering every word he'd ever spoken, every kindness he'd ever given. By dawn, she found him saddling his horse. "So that's it then?" she asked quietly. He looked up, startled, then sighed. "Evelyn, I never planned to stay. This ranch, this town, it ain't my place." Her throat tightened. "Then why did you come?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Because something told me you needed someone who wasn't afraid to look you in the eye." She stepped closer. "And now," he said softly, "you don't need me anymore." Evelyn shook her head, her voice trembling. "You're wrong. I needed someone to see me, yes, but I want someone to stay." The air between them stilled. The wind whispered through the wheat fields like a sigh. Cole's hands, calloused and sure, lowered from the reins. "Evelyn," he said, his voice rough, "I'm not a man who's ever known home. Everywhere I go, I just fix what's broken, then move on." She reached up and touched his cheek, her fingers brushing the faint scar near his jaw. "Then maybe it's time you stop running. Maybe this." She gestured toward the land, the house, the wide waiting sky. "Is where you fix yourself." Something in his expression softened. He drew in a slow breath and whispered, "You sure you want a man like me?" Her lips curved faintly. "You're the only one who ever saw the woman behind the ghost. That's worth more than anything." The silence that followed was the kind that didn't need words. Cole stepped down from the horse, his shadow falling across hers. He reached for her hand, holding it like something sacred. "I reckon," he murmured. "A man'd be a fool to walk away from a love strong enough to survive fire." She smiled then, really smiled, the way she hadn't since she was a girl. The sun rose over the ridge, gilding the ranch in light. The world felt new again. In the months that followed, the ranch thrived under both their names, Shaw and Maddox Cattle Co. The townsfolk joked that the Black Widow had finally found her match. And though Evelyn still wore black sometimes, it wasn't out of mourning. It was out of pride. She often said that love in the West wasn't written in promises. It was written in dust. It was what stayed when the storms came, what clung to your boots, your breath, your bones. And when people asked about Cole Maddox, the giant who came and never left, Evelyn would just smile and say, "He didn't save me. He reminded me I was worth saving." As the sun set over the golden fields, the shadows of a woman and a man stretched side by side, no longer ghosts of the past, but legends of the West.